Clifton-Brown.
Madam Deputy Speaker, may I thank you, Mr Speaker, and the Backbench Business Committee for selecting the defence debate for debate today, if I may say so, particularly appropriate in Armed Forces Week. I also like to pay tribute to the Minister and my honourable friend on the front bench for being here today to listen to this speech, and hopefully the Minister for answering a few questions. I'd like to pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Slough, who is Chairman of the Defence Select Committee, who would have actually joined me as a joint application for this debate, but his committee have been away from Parliament on a visit. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, the defence budget is one of the most important estimates that the House can debate and scrutinise. With war raging in Ukraine, the ongoing Israeli-Gaza conflict, and now what is happening in Iran, our world feels increasingly unstable. The Prime Minister has recently returned from the G7 and is now at the NATO summit, ensuring that our interests align with our European, AUKUS and American allies, which is critical. As General Walker, Chief of the General Staff, said last July, we must be ready for war within 3 years. And the rest of my speech, I think, is probably devoted to that theme. So first, I'd like to discuss the figures of the defence budget. I think most people in this House are pleased to see that defence spending is now considered a priority. The Strategic Defence Review announced early in June was welcomed and confirmed that defence spending will be going up from 2% of GDP to 2.5% by April 27, with an extra 0.1% going towards intelligence and security services contributions. There was a further commitment to increase defence spending to 3% of GDP in the next Parliament, but it is noted that no date has been set for this yet. The new announcement by the Prime Minister at the NATO summit suggests the government will expect to spend 5% of GDP on national security and defence by the end of the next Parliament or by 2035, which includes 3% core defence spending and 1.5% on resilience and security spending. I'd like to ask members to bear with me while I just go through these somewhat complicated figures of what this will involve. In 2024, 1% of GDP is around 28 billion, according to the House of Commons Library. But hopefully our GDP will increase as the years go by. Colleagues should note critically that a percentage increase in the budget is not the same as an increase in percentage of GDP, hence the much higher figures that I'm about to go into. The current Ministry of Defence budget, according to the Treasury Red Book for 25/6, is 62.2 billion. That is around 2.2% of GDP. For the government to reach the needed 2.5% of GDP by 27, and set aside the fact that the MOD budget does not quite align with the NATO compliance spending, the defence budget must increase to around 70 billion in 27/8. And with the extra 1.1% that I mentioned earlier, that is a total of 72.8 billion. Therefore, another 9 to 11 billion pounds needs to be found in the next 2 years. So moving further into the next Parliament, if we're to reach the 3% of GDP figure in the next Parliament, the defence budget will need to equate to around 84 billion in current prices today. And after the announcement today of the 3.5% equating figures is 98 billion, and core defence and resilience of 1.5% is 42 billion, therefore the total spending by 2035 will need to be 140 billion. These calculations are also dependent on the GDP staying the same and not increasing, in which case the budget will, of course, increase as well. Therefore, I'd simply like to ask the Minister today, where is all this money coming from? Because it is a huge amount of money. Now, with the failure to produce the Defence Investment Plan, along with the Strategic Defence Review, the SDR is merely a list of ambitions and aspirations with few receipts and invoices attached. In the ministerial statement, I did ask the Secretary of State if he could confirm when we would be able to scrutinise the figures, but I understand the Defence Investment Plan is still an unfinished piece of work and not due to be published until the autumn. That is a long way off. And as chairman of the Public Accounts Committee, the committee are always looking at how effectively money is spent and whether it could be spent more effectively given the taxpayer best value for money and whether indeed it is feasible. However, the committee has not been able to fulfil that statutory role of scrutinising equipment defence spending for at least 12 months. The last defence equipment plan was published in November 22. This sent out a 10-year spending plan for equipment procurement, which was around 305.5 billion, and there was a 16.9 billion shortfall of the money that was then available. So the Permanent Secretary did come to our... Can I just finish this sentence? And of course I'll give way to my honourable friend. I'm pleased that the Permanent Secretary did accept our invitation to come to our committee in April to discuss the equipment plan, but he didn't come with any proposals as to how and when we might be able to scrutinise this defence expenditure to see whether these huge aspirations were affordable in this budget, or the next budget of 3%, or the following one of 3.5%. So I think it's really important that Parliament does actually have a timetable when we will be able to do that scrutiny. Happily give way to my honourable friend for spell.
I'm grateful for my honourable friend giving way. He mentions the equipment plan. Does he share the Defence Select Committee's frustration that I think he mentioned that the last time anyone was able to scrutinise that was in 2022? And is he aware that when Lord Robertson came to the Defence Committee to discuss the Strategic Defence Review last week, he was surprised that the Defence Committee was being denied access to the equipment programme, as indeed the Public Accounts Committee is, so that the government simply can't be held to account on what they're spending the money on?
Well, my honourable friend has made the case very eloquently. I've also made it. The Middlest will have heard it. Hopefully she might have something to positively say about this in her summing up. Of course.
For allowing me to intervene. To what extent does he believe that the situation is even worse than he has outlined? Because we know that inflationary pressures on defence bear far more heavily than on practically, with the possible exception of healthcare, any other part of public spending. And yet I see no evidence in the Defence Review or anywhere else over the past 12 months of that being properly accounted for by ministers or those who are advising them.
Well, my honourable friend must have read my mind, because when I come on to submarines, I will mention this very factor of inflation in defence costs. So the MOD is being reorganised into 4 sections. There will be a permanent secretary in charge of the department. The chief of the defence organisation will be in charge of all personnel matters. A new National Armaments Director will be in charge of all matters to do with procurement, digital and research, and including all the matters to do with what is now in the Defence Infrastructure Organisation. And, of course, finally, the Defence Nuclear Organisation. So those are the 4 parts of it. But this particular debate focuses on the National Armaments Director, and his appointment has been ongoing since it was announced on the 17th of December 24 last year. And I'm hopeful that the department might soon be in a position to announce who they have selected to do the job. And I have to say the job is a very prestigious, a very large one, and it has a very large salary attached to it of £400,000. So the National Armaments Director will be responsible, as I said, for all defence procurement, all defence infrastructure organisation, including defence housing, digital and research. And this represents a huge part of the defence budget. He will have significantly more control over the acquisition process than hitherto. And I hope some of the announcements that have been made by the government will come to fruition, including being able to go from award to contract in a 2-year maximum. And the department is hoping to do that by involving industry at a much earlier stage in the process, so to help solve problems. And rather than over-specifying the requirements, this will actually streamline it and simplify the contracts. This should also allow our defence sector to export more equipment to the international market, which will in turn support even more jobs in the sector. One contract that demonstrates the weakness in our procurement strategy was the Ajax Armoured Fighting Vehicle, a programme contracted to General Dynamics. And this was both subject to many Defence Select Committee, Public Accounts Committee, many UQs in this House. It was originally contracted in 2011 for delivery in 2017 and then deferred to 2021. and the trials were halted, as we all know, due to safety concerns, and the contract renegotiated for 2024. Perhaps the Minister could tell us when all 180 vehicles will be in operation. In addition to General Dynamics being awarded that contract, they were also awarded the infamous Moorfields Battlefield Radio System contract, and this has cost so far £828 million. So can the Minister confirm it is currently in the Evolve to Transition Partnership, and when its in-service date is likely to occur? It was intended to replace the existing Bowman communication system by 2026, but this will now have to be extended with modifications to at least 2031 and possibly 2035. And I think this may lead a credibility gap in our defence system. And I think the whole House would appreciate an update on where we are with our tri-service battlefield communications system and how this could be accelerated. Another contract that should receive more scrutiny is the E7 Wedgetail early warning and control early warning and control aircraft. Whilst the SDR says we will procure further units and share costs with our NATO allies, the Pentagon has labelled the E-17 expensive, gold-plated and not survivable in the modern battlefield. Again, we would be grateful to the Minister for providing further details on this contract. The government, as I said in my answer to the Minister of Procurement's statement today, and I welcome, has committed to buying more F-35 aircraft, 12 F-35As and 15 F-35Bs. And that is welcome. This capability of the A's will be an alternative to our seaborne nuclear capability. Another huge commitment as part of the SDR is commitment to invest in up to 12 new SSN AUKUS nuclear-powered submarines. The submarines are due to be in operation in the 2030s and 40s, with a submarine being built every 18 months. But there are huge challenges ahead due to this being a new class of submarines and concerns with the lack of capacity at Barrow-in-Furness. However, no cost per submarine has ever been disclosed, and this programme is likely to take more than 10 years, and we really need to see some of the detail. Is this deal underpinned by the government's eventual commitment to increase expenditure to 3% in the next Parliament? So we can see whether it's feasible, and we can also see, and I'll be grateful if the Minister would confirm this, talking about long in-service dates, as I was with the F-35s earlier on, and the Minister agreed with this. We need to see actually the early work in feasibility in contracts beginning as soon as possible to meet this long tail end to buying and building and commissioning these submarines. This strategically important contract, when costs announced, will need leadership from the National Armaments Director to ensure it remains on track budget, like so many others before it. The Public Accounts Committee have asked for an update by the end of June 26, which will demonstrate how well defence procurement has improved under the first year of the National Armaments Director Group. The renewed focus on nuclear is important when looking at the ever-increasing nuclear enterprise budget. In 2024, the budget was £10.9 billion, which is around 18% of the whole budget. The 10-year DNE's costs have increased by £10 billion, from £117.8 billion to £128 billion. And it's not clear whether the extra £15 billion announced in the SDR committed to the warhead is included in this figure. However, the budget is rising due to various factors, technical factors, but inflation and the speed of manufacturing which we now need to build these submarines at to meet the timetable that is absolutely necessary for our defence. The budget is also one of the few that is left unscrutinised due to the sensitive nature of these contracts. But as chairman of the PAC, I am constitutionally obliged to see the detail. Ongoing, this needs to be resolved, and I'm grateful for the commitment of the Secretary of State in working towards a solution. Sensitive scrutiny has never been more important due to the context of these figures that I announced earlier. Defence personnel is another focus in the defence budget. The national insurance rise meant that the budget had to increase by £14.3 billion to pay for the Treasury's national insurance employer tax rise. The number of people leaving the armed forces is far too high. Last year, for every 100 personnel we were recruiting in the army, we lost 130. This is completely unsustainable, especially as the SDR commits to increasing our forces to 76,000. The PAC have recently held a session on cadet and reserve forces, which again the SDR clarifies that the government wants to increase the number of cadets by 30% and critically reservists by 20%. And again, I would be grateful if the government could confirm how much this will cost. We do need to make joining the armed forces a much more attractive option than it currently is. Some of the defence housing I've seen, frankly, a prisoner would get better and safer conditions. Much of it has mould, rust, leaks, and this must change if we want to improve the retention and recruitment of our armed forces in giving them a better package of remuneration and conditions of service. So I welcome the £1.5 billion to improve defence housing as part of the SDR and the £6.1 billion that has been spent to repurchase 35,000 homes following the landmark deal with Annington Homes. This will allow the MOD to undertake major improvement schemes. Another issue with recruitment is the length of time it takes to enrol service personnel into training. We used to have an armed forces recruitment centre on every high street in the country. People could walk in off the street, sign up, wear a new uniform in the next 2 weeks. But there are now stories of recruitment taking well over 6 months, which is simply not good enough. We need to be looking further afield to ensure the military has the right skills for the future. Cyber warfare is becoming an increasing and real threat. And I believe the MOD could do more to recruit those with AI and digital skills that wouldn't necessarily meet the medical and fitness requirements needed for entry for a normal military personnel. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think, yes, very briefly.
Very generous indeed. Would he comment on the government's enthusiasm or otherwise for the Haythornthwaite review of careers in the armed forces, which was carried out under the last government and was put in train by the last government, but we hear tell perhaps there's been some backsliding since, which is a pity, since Rick Haythornthwaite's review was magisterial and had already shown signs, through zigzag careers and spectrum of service, of being appealing to servicemen and servicewomen and holding them in, both in the regulars and reserves. And it would be a pity if we didn't have that process continue on the basis of not made here-itis.
Sir Geoffrey,
to my honourable friend for raising that issue. I can't tell what's in the government's mind. Maybe the Minister will be able to tell us this afternoon. But given the SDR makes it perfectly clear that they want to increase the numbers of our armed forces considerably, we've got to consider every aspect of recruiting and retaining more of those, and particularly when they've got skills, making sure they don't just leave the army or the armed forces as soon as they've got those skills. So I think this is a really important issue that my honourable friend has raised. In conclusion, there is no greater duty on a government than defending the nation. Yet for all members of this House and for the general public, we need to have confidence that our armed forces are properly equipped to do the job. This does not mean that we complacently give in to every demand, but it is the role of PAC members to carefully scrutinise the defence budget. Wasting spending and shortfalls are stopping our armed forces from keeping us safe in the most efficient and effective ways. Therefore, it is imperative that the MOD release more information on their finances in a timely manner so that we can thoroughly scrutinise them and thus ensure Parliament that our armed forces are able to do their job in the most effective way with world-beating equipment.
Craig.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Very briefly, may I firstly thank the Minister for that positive contribution. Who would have thought 25 years ago when we sat next to each other in the public accounts, passing each other notes, holding the relevant civil service to account, that we would be in our respective positions now. But there we are. I thank my honourable friend from the front bench for his contribution. In fact, I thank all members for what I think has been a very positive debate. And now we're looking forward to seeing positive results from all those requests in the debate, and we will look forward to working with this government, but holding them severely to account for all the things that they've promised. Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you.